Last minute. Good morning. Welcome to those of you who are joining us virtually and those of you who are here with us in body for today's worship service. If you're visiting this morning, we're glad you're with us. We welcome you and we invite you to bring your whole self and all your lived experiences to this service and online. In a few moments, we will read the covenant on the wall here, and we will light the chalice. We do these rituals so that we are reminded that we must continually renew our promise to live into our covenant. Simply put, our purpose is to put love into action. We say our covenant as a way to remember and live out the community of love and justice we aim to be. Our topic this morning will be presented by Reverend Joel and Elizabeth Valencia, and it will look at the workers who help feed us and how Unitarian Universalists can bring a greater spirit to each meal. So again, welcome, and let us worship together.
Good morning. I'm Joel Miller. I'm the interim minister here at All Souls, and so pleased that you're here this morning with us. I'm so excited because we have coffee hour after the service today. Right? That's why I brought the cup to remind myself. I wanted to make sure to say that we're lucky that the folks who were in this congregation 30 years ago put in this fantastic heating and cooling system, and it has this really high quality recirculation with inside and outside air, and it actually meets the quality standards for keeping ourselves safe during a time of COVID. And go All Souls. Thank you, ancestors out there in the Memorial Garden. We wear the masks also to really make being together as safe as it is to drive to church, to be at church, which is, again, one of the great blessings of how we are able to be together. Thinking about coffee hour, we're not doing food quite yet. Little steps as we get ourselves back together, although somewhat higher risk to do coffee hour, we've got some great equipment, and again, because of your generosity, we have some great equipment in there to keep ourselves safe. I always like eating food at church, having food at church. The sense of community, eating together is it's a powerful experience. And we're talking about food today, and we're thinking about where our food comes from and being mindful about how we're connected to one another through our food. It struck me how it's easy to forget that. I think it was about 20 years ago, a member of the congregation at the time was the director of the chief officer of a small nonprofit in Buffalo, New York, that had urban gardens in neighborhoods where people didn't have a lot of economic resources. Sometimes parents, for example, would be working 2 or 3 different jobs, sometimes putting together a lot of part-time jobs, usually minimum wage jobs, and so it would be difficult for the children in these families to have experience of farms or even gardens. So we had these gardens in these neighborhoods so that families could have the experience of gardening and get a real up-close sense of how food happens. And it became very immediate to me how important this was. I'd gone to visit an urban garden with this member of the Unitarian Universalist church I was serving. And we were there, and there were some new kids in the neighborhood, and they were very excited to see a garden. And they came in, they had come onto the property, and I was with the kids, we were looking around at the various plots where things were grown, and we came up to this one raised bed, and the director pulled some carrots out, and they were nice and long, and they looked beautiful orange. They looked ready to go. She washed them off, and after she washed them off, she handed them out to everybody, and one of the kids was looking at the carrot with confusion, and she said, "Well, you can eat that. It's just like you get from the store." And he said, "I'm not eating that. It came out of dirt." I tried to be helpful, and I started eating my carrot. It's easy to become disconnected from each other, not just from our food and how it connects us. So part of what we do at church is remember how powerfully we are connected, how important it is to remember the beauty and the wonder in our connections with one another. Welcome this morning. It's good to be together.
Very brief announcements. The first is that we are still looking for people who are interested in serving on the All Souls board. If you're sitting here thinking to yourself, I'm not really sure I understand what's involved, we highly encourage you to attend a board meeting. Those are always on the second Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. So please feel free to do that, and also to reach out to existing board members during coffee hour, and they can tell you a little bit more about their experience. Also, an All Souls member, Leslie Gibbs, is the president of an NGO that is called Hands On Global and is doing some important work in the Ukraine right now. So I hope that you'll read more about that in our bulletin and consider supporting that. The work is mobile, and I know their needs are many. Lastly, I will also just add that if you love being outdoors and are looking impatiently at the snowflakes that are insisting on falling down this weekend, then you might be interested in helping with the All Souls Butterfly Garden or with watering the All Souls Grove. In both cases, please reach out to Indra Frank. Thank you, Indra. And we continue to need volunteers for our nursery, which is newly reopened, which makes it much easier for parents with young children who cannot yet be vaccinated to attend the service and other church programs. Please reach out to our staff member, Amanda Giorgiani, if you would be interested in helping out there. Thank you so much.
Good morning. I invite you all, however you're comfortable, to join me in a call to worship this morning. In a space like this, we hope to be welcomed just as we are. In a space like this, we can walk in with a shawl or a headscarf, with a rosary or a set of malas or a Muslim tasbih. In a space like this, we enter as strangers and we leave as friends. In a space like this, we go outside of our comfort zones. We rejoice in others' joys, and we light a candle in honor of others' difficulties. May we continue to welcome the new and the returning. May we continue to fine-tune the craft of our welcome. Again, welcome this morning.
I don't know which one looks good. Elena's gonna do. This morning, Annalise Kinslow will light our chalice as we recite the covenant that is on the wall behind us. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant. They are, aren't they? It's pretty helpful. All right, can everyone hear me? Awesome. I brought something special with me today. It looks like this. Do you know what kind of plant that is? No. No? Any guesses? What could it be? I feel like I heard someone say it though. Not basil. That's a good guess. Who said it? Liz said it. Your mom said it. It's a tomato plant. It is indeed. And we've been growing it in the makerspace. And it just got transferred to a new pot this morning because it's getting bigger. The name of this tomato is a mouthful. Let's see if I can say it correctly. It's called a Wapsipinickin peach. I'm not kidding. And it kind of makes sense when you see the tomatoes because they're smaller, they're sweet, they're orange, and they're a little bit fuzzy on the outside. They're very, very tasty.
I know.
You know about those? They're a little bigger than cherry tomatoes. Did you know that there are more than 10,000 kinds of tomatoes in the world?
No.
10,000. That's bananas. That kind of abundance of having so many foods that are different and special is just a miracle to me. That's what you do when you're enthused about tomatoes. Would you come sit with me and help me out with this? Do you think you could hold this plant? And potatoes, and they rhyme. They're related too. Here, you sit right here. If you promise to sit, you can hold this tomato plant for me. Can you do that? Thank you so much. Now, raise your hand if you've ever tried growing a tomato plant before. Aha, pretty good. Now raise your hand if you've ever eaten a tomato off a plant that you grew. Actually, still pretty robust, you guys. Well done. Now, do it again if you've ever grown at least half your food for the year. Whoa, all those hands went away really fast, huh? Almost nobody. And that's not really surprising because we live in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is not the country. It is a city.
That she has eaten a tomato off a plant.
That is true. Liz has, you have. I saw you last year eat a tomato off a plant that you grew.
So I guess me.
So I guess you. There you go. But in cities, we don't usually grow all our food because people live very close together.
I can't remember. Was it this plant?
It was not this plant. This is a new plant. And you know what? During the week, you get up and sometimes you go to school, don't you? So it's hard to grow your food every day. And most of the grown-ups get up and do jobs that don't really have anything to do with growing food. We might teach, we might make things, we might solve certain kinds of problems, but we can only do that because we're depending on somebody else entirely to grow food for everybody. It's a covenant, you see. I can work at All Souls because I'm trusting my neighbors to grow food for me and for Bill and for my kids. I have a lot of respect for the work of growing food. I love my job, but most likely none of you are going to go hungry if I don't do it. This is not true for the people who produce our food. We all depend on them in a very basic way. I know. And I don't know if you remember this, but we have a new preschool coming into our building. In that downstairs part that some of you have been to and visited, most of the kids in that preschool have parents who work to grow our food and get it ready to go to stores. Because the preschool's here, the kids have an awesome place to be and learn and play while their parents go to work and make it possible for our city to exist. They are the whole reason our city can exist. I think that's extremely special. And I hope that we will all treat our preschool families as friends, neighbors, and honored guests. And I also hope one more thing. I hope that this year, you'll all get your hands dirty. Who has helped plant something in the makerspace so far this year? Yep, Annalise, you definitely have. Savvy's not here today, but she planted marigolds, and they're all coming up. And it feels good to do that. I don't know if you know this, but there are microbes in the soil that have evolved to make us happier when we touch them. True story. I might have told some of you that before. Our first source, the spirit of wonder and mystery, is around us all the time. Growing our food and our flowers and our herbs, even just a little bit of them, is a sacred thing. And many of us have lost that skill. How many of your parents grew some of their food? How many of your grandparents? How many of your great-grandparents lived on a farm? Quite a few people. You know what? If our ancestors could do it, we can too. We can make French fries from blue potatoes that we grew. We can grow purple green beans that turn green when we cook them. This is true. I've done both of those things. They're real things. And if we do that, we'll start to understand why it's important to have 10,000 kinds of tomatoes. If we get our hands in the dirt and grow huge plants from tiny little plants like this, we will begin to understand how much work it takes for the parents of the kids at our Head Start preschool to grow and pack up all the food we see in our grocery stores to make sure that our city can exist. I'll tell you one last thing. A week ago, Susie and Nesreen and Graham and I were all moving our community garden beds to make space for where the new fence will go, and a very nice man from the Head Start preschool named Bloss came out and saw what we were doing, and he said, "Why are you doing this all by yourselves? You should have told me. I would have gotten a group of people together to come and help you." And he did stay, and he helped us the whole rest of the time. Now, I don't think move the garden was on his to-do list for that day. But I do think that help your neighbor is on Bloss's to-do list every day. And that's how we ended up being able to live in a city together and do so many different kinds of jobs and still have food because of that kind of teamwork and that kind of care. So I hope we will remember that Head Start families are not new to our community. They have always been a really important part of it. And this is the best opportunity we've ever had to learn from them and to give back. And if you're interested in learning more about that, there are 2 books about the Head Start preschool over here on the quilts that you can look at during the service. Thank you. Okay, bud. Can you come with me over to the quilts? Thank you so much.
I'm going to invite you to sing together at this time. There are these teal-colored hymnals. They're the newer ones. Teal is sort of that green-blue color. Number 1031, 1031, Filled with Loving Kindness. And I invite you to stand or to sit as is comfortable, as works for you. And one of the things about this is a traditional Buddhist meditation. And when we sing it, each time we go through, all of the words except one that we say stay the same. The one that changes is, first time we sing, "May I be filled with loving kindness." And then the second time we say, "May you be filled with loving kindness." And then the last time we will sing, "May we be filled with loving kindness." Kindness is something we need to do, not just for each other, but even for ourselves. I invite you to stand if you would like or are able. filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May I be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole.
This morning, we have a reading titled Touch the Earth Once Again by Juan Felipe Herrera, who is U.S. Poet Laureate. He was the child of farm workers. This is what we do. This is what the cotton truck driver does. This is what the tobacco leaf roller does. This is what the washerwoman and the laundry worker does. This is what the grape and artichoke worker does. Not to mention the cucumber workers. Not to mention the spinach and beet workers. Not to mention the poultry women workers. Not to mention the packing house workers and the winery workers and the lettuce and broccoli and peach and apricot and squash and apple and that almost magical watermelon and the speckled melon and the honeydew. The workers, this is what they do. Notice how they bend in the fires no one sees. Notice their ecstatic colors and their knotted shirts. Notice where they cash their tiny and wrinkled checks and pay stubs, stand in that small town desert sun-dry store, then walk out they do, and stall for a moment they do, underneath this colossal tree with its condor wings, shedding solace for a second or two. Notice how they touch the earth for you.
We share joys and sorrows every Sunday. It's part of our spiritual practice as community. It's a way we practice the covenants to help one another and to live in the spirit of love. We note our joy this morning for the ministry of Leslie Gibbs. Leslie is a member of All Souls and an emergency room medical practitioner here in Indianapolis. She's coordinating a group of volunteer medical workers right now. These medical workers are providing emergency health care to refugees in Ukraine, right along the border with Romania. 50,000 refugees. And these medical workers, a group probably of about 20 people, are the people who are available to care for these 50,000 people with their medical needs, their traumas, perhaps wounds from the war. The organization is hands-on global. This morning, let us note our joy for people like Leslie Gibbs, who serve in this world, who are there for all of us in times of need. Note our sorrow also at the war that is being waged in Ukraine. Let the work of our living tradition, our being in community, be that work which turns us away from seeing war as anything as useful, ever useful. Let us know also that there are as many joys and sorrows here this morning as there are people watching and people sitting in this room. For all of the joys and sorrows we brought with us this morning, may we remember the importance of our being together. We need not carry any of these joys or any of these sorrows alone. First, this meditation by Cesar Chavez in English. Show me the suffering of the most miserable. Thus I will know my people's plight. Free me to pray for others, for you are present in every person. Help me take responsibility for my own life so that I can be free at last. Grant me courage to serve my neighbor, for in service there is true life. Grant me honesty and patience so that I can work with other workers. Enlighten us with song and celebration so that the Spirit will be alive among us. Let the Spirit flourish and grow so that we will never tire of the struggle. Let us remember those who have died for justice, for they have given us life. Help us love even those who hate us, so we can change the world. Amen.
Now that you know what the English says, I'm going to say Cesar Chavez's prayer in Spanish, and I invite you to hold what you remember, what you felt from hearing the English as you listen to the Spanish. Oración del campesino en la lucha. Enséñame el sufrimiento de los más desafortunados. Así conoceré el dolor de mi pueblo. Líbrame a orar por los demás, porque estás presente en cada persona. Ayúdame a tomar responsabilidad de mi propia vida. Solo así seré libre al fin. Concédeme valentía para servir al prójimo, porque en la entrega hay vida verdadera. Concédeme honradez y paciencia, para que yo pueda trabajar junto con otros trabajadores. Alúmbranos con el canto y la celebración, para que levanten el espíritu entre nosotros. Que el espíritu florezca y crezca, para que no nos cansemos entre la lucha. Nos acordamos de los que han caído por la justicia, porque a nosotros han entregado la vida. Ayúdanos a amar aún a los que nos odian. Así podemos cambiar el mundo. Amén.
So this morning, our offertory contributions will go to Hands On Global, and it's in your bulletin. You can read a detailed description of what they do. As Reverend Joel mentioned, they're providing emergency medical care to refugees in partnership with government and agencies throughout the world. But right now, Hands On Global was asked to respond to the refugee crisis in the Ukraine-Romanian border. So our own Leslie Gibbs has volunteered her service in directing that organization's team of volunteer medical workers, contributing and caring for 50,000 refugees in Western Ukraine. So this is so important to us that all our contributions this morning will go directly into medicines, medical supplies, and logistical support for Hands On Global. To contribute, you can put cash in the collection plate, or online you can visit a link where you will find or you can go to the website as well. Actually, the website is probably the easiest thing for you to do if you're online. And there's a link that says Give to All Souls here. So if you do that, be sure to mention that your donation is for Ukraine. Thank you for your generosity in supporting the mission of All Souls, and your continued love for one another, and your willingness to support Hands On Global. We'll accept the morning offering now.
Good morning again. So we've heard a poem by Juan Felipe Herrera and a prayer by the labor organizer Cesar Chavez. One invites us into a practice of awareness for the workers who touch the earth for us. The other invites us into their struggle. COVID has really highlighted the gaps in our US system and global systems that take for granted and intentionally use the hard work of our essential workers for profit. Today, I want to highlight farm workers as our essential workers because they are the least protected by our policies and the most exploited by corporations and their greed. Almost everything that we spend our time purchasing has been touched by the labor of a farm worker or Mexican laborer. To understand this better, a dip into US history is needed. During World War II, the United States went into a bilateral agreement with Mexico after requesting Mexican guest workers to come to the US to work in the fields due to a labor shortage. These guest workers would replace the poor blacks, whites, and Mexican American workers who were moving into factory work during the war. This happened at the same time that Mexico and its citizens were struggling economically. Mexican citizens were working in the fields of Mexico but lived in poverty, and many were struggling to find work. This program would bring a sense of hope for the Mexican people already struggling deeply in systemic poverty. The Bracero program, as it was known, began on August 4th, 1942. Bracero comes from the Spanish word brazo, which means arm. And the word bracero means someone who works with his arms. This program had diplomatic agreements that promised Mexico that these guest workers would have their labor rights, including freedom from discrimination and racism, freedom from poor wages, protection from having to join the military during World War II, and promised wages that were to go into a savings account for them in Mexico's banks. The program lasted through December 31st, 1964, lasting a total of 22 years. The Bracero program brought with it 2 million Mexican guest workers who provided necessary agricultural labor. There were over 4 million contracts. These were short-term contracts that did not provide real stability. Many workers who were approved to be a part of the program in Mexico came to the United States, sacrificing everything to be here, only to be rejected upon inspections of their bodies, without any way home. Yet these guest workers who made it through were proud of the work they came to do in the United States as they searched for opportunities that they hoped would take them out of poverty and to help them with their families. They saw themselves as strong, capable, and skilled. And skilled they were because many of them had been farmers of their own lands. The legacy of the Bracero program is that it did create opportunities for hundreds of thousands of Mexican families that would go on to settle here in some way or another, despite the discrimination and racism and exploitation of their bodies for cheap labor that grew the US economy exponentially, but created an unsustainable food chain in our country. And those wages they were promised, they've never received. So where are we today? Farm workers are majority Latinx and indigenous people. 75% are from Mexico or Central America, and they're either here on an H-2A visa program or they remain undocumented. At least 50% of farm workers are undocumented, although estimates say it's up to 75. And this makes sense, keeping in mind that around the time of the Bracero program, there were states like Texas that opened the borders to undocumented Mexican workers outside of the agreement, who Texas used for labor for very low and unfair wages. And these workers faced discriminatory experiences all over Texas. Mexico had blacklisted Texas, along with other states like Indiana, for these practices. But states found a way to continue to exploit Mexican bodies for cheap labor, taking advantage of their poverty. Today, many of the farm workers are still directly recruited, still face sexual harassment, and some face a modern type of slavery. And what we end up with are farm owners in battle with labor contractors who don't assume responsibility for the exploitation of its labor force. 1 out of every 3 farm worker families live below the poverty line. I tried wrapping my mind around this to understand how farm workers who pick, select, and aesthetically package our food struggle to feed their own. The food that they put on our tables does not end up on theirs. Labor laws for farm workers continue to be a point of dismissal. My hope today is that we welcome the awareness of what continues to be one of the most dangerous and underappreciated and overexploited jobs in the world. And our history has a lot more to teach us about the history of farm workers in North America through NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement with Mexico, the US, and Canada. Unfortunately, NAFTA restructured the Mexican economy, displacing rural and indigenous Mexicans, and it has profited corporations and not really the workers. All around us, farm workers are devalued and blamed for the loss of US jobs, even though the US created these dependencies. Often the language used includes words like low-skilled or unskilled labor, even though these farm workers are responsible for planting, cultivating, and harvesting the crops. During the Bracero program, these workers were identified by numbers, not by their names, or categorized as loads alongside metal, wood, and hay. Yet farm workers remain resilient. From within the job, they've chosen to value and honor within systems that keep them poor. The language used around us makes it easier for the dismissal of the rights to occur, to support capitalist greed. But this is not the language of a farm worker, and it should not be the language of a Unitarian Universalist. Just like any other profession where we are judged for how well we do a task over and over again, degree or no degree, farm workers have too fine-tuned their craft. Raw physical endurance and technique of picking lettuce for hours on end. The manual dexterity, the delicate musician-like dance of fingers of rapidly harvesting parsley, the lightning-fast mental calculations and even aesthetic design of strawberry picking is part of a farm worker's craft. And there's hope, because these same skilled and capable and inherently worthy people that feed us, that connect to us via our food, are also leading the charge towards justice. Worker-driven social responsibility programs like the Fair Food Program exist where farm workers are standing up to corporations, demanding their human rights. In Florida, farm workers are now waiting for Wendy's and Publix to listen to their demands around the purchase of tomatoes and farm codes of conduct. Through raising consciousness amongst workers and cultivating consumer commitment, farm workers bring forth a type of systemic change that they need. There's so much in the history of farm workers that I have never been taught prior to the research of this service. I know my father has worked in the fields in California, and he's proud of his hard work. I too have had to wrestle with the biases I have internalized as a child of a Mexican laborer. We, the children, grow up with pride knowing that our parents work so hard and skillfully do their work. But then we enter a world that devalues them. As a Unitarian Universalist, I'm reminded by our first principle to honor the inherent worth and dignity of people. And people don't need to be essential workers to have this inherent worth and value. What influences my spiritual practice towards food is my Muslim background. As a Muslim, I've been taught and I've cultivated that thanking the people is thanking the divine. And I think about the commitment and dedication of our farm workers, that despite the injustice, they continue on. And I think to myself that I will never again see the Mexico-US border the same way. It's a border of opportunity, and today I choose to honor those that feed us and fight for justice, and those we have to thank for so many of our labor laws today. I'm inspired as a consumer to witness farm workers and their fight for justice, respect, and dignity.
I invite you to sing at this time again with me this Buddhist meditation. I invite you to stand in spirit or in body as you are comfortable or willing. Number 1031. I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole. Thank you. Please be seated. I love salad. I love salad. I eat it at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. It's one of the great joys of my life. I get to sit down for lunch or dinner, or lunch and dinner, and I have a big bowl of salad with fresh lettuce, crunchy, juicy. Especially my favorite, a mix of romaine, green and red leaf lettuces, and butterhead lettuces, sometimes a little radicchio thrown in. Usually I have a little dressing, sometimes plain. Often I also add proteins, perhaps some nuts and some fruit like apples, or I'll have some fish, some salmon. But I've learned over the years how important it is, before I dig into the bowl of this wonderful lettuce that I love, to remember who brought me my food. I began this mindfulness practice when I was a theological student 35 years ago in Berkeley, California. So when I was studying at the Thomas Starr King School for the Ministry, a Unitarian Universalist theological school in Berkeley, California, every day, every weekday, I would take the train up from Fremont, California to Berkeley. It's the Bay Area Rapid Transit train, the BART train. I'd take it up. And back then in Fremont, Fremont's very built up now, but back then, there were still agricultural fields in Fremont, just south of it in Milpitas, and even in Union City, just north of Fremont. And when the BART train would leave the station, immediately I would see fields, agricultural fields. And in the fields there would be workers. And these fields were actually, for the most part, dedicated to growing lettuce, the green leaf lettuce, the romaine lettuce, the butterhead lettuce that I still love and loved even then. And even when I was walking to the train station in the morning, I would see these same agricultural workers jammed together in the back of cheap pickup trucks. And they'd be riding to work in those fields. They'd be sitting on just the edge of the pickup truck. Sometimes their legs hanging over the outside rather than the inside. They'd be jammed in tight in those pickup trucks. There weren't any seats in the back. There weren't seat belts. I might even see them already in the fields by the time the train had arrived and I'd gotten on it and we'd departed. And that very same lettuce that I might see them harvesting in the fields one morning, the next evening, the next day in the evening, I might be buying it at the grocery store. So I was a Unitarian Universalist in one of our theological schools, and so I was primed to pay attention. Thomas Starr King School was in this collection of 8 other theological schools from other faiths: Methodist, Presbyterian, Catholic, Lutheran. There was also a Mormon study house in the same neighborhood. There was a Jewish, an office for Jewish studies connected to this group of theological schools. There were Buddhists, there were Hindus. It was an amazing experience. In fact, the neighborhood has a name in Berkeley. It's called Holy Hill, because it's got a lot of holiness up there. I found myself often in conversation with Catholic and Episcopal seminarians, with theological students from the Methodist or Lutheran seminaries. There'd be Buddhists and Muslims finishing their dissertations at one of the schools as they went on to scholarship in their own traditions. Sometimes I'd be fortunate enough to have meals, an interfaith meal, just because we were hanging out after a class together. We would begin our lunches with prayers or meditations, depending on who was doing the praying that particular lunch time. Always we reminded one another to be thankful for the workers in those fields. Those same workers I'd just seen maybe 3 or 4 hours before. Sometimes after we'd begun to eat the prayer, we'd finished our prayers, someone from one of the religious groups would say they were envious of us Unitarian Universalist students. Here we were in congregations and would be having the privilege to serve congregations of Unitarian Universalists. Such freedom to think and explore, such freedom of spirit. And what cool people with a great reputation for doing social justice work. They didn't have any illusions that were more perfect or more special than anybody else. They weren't saying that. But they thought we were pretty cool. I also learned in these interfaith moments that no religion is perfect. Not Unitarian Universalism, not any other religious practice, whether it's an organized one or a disorganized one. One day, a Catholic student gave thanks in her prayer for the workers in the fields I'd seen that morning as I rode that train up to Berkeley and classes and lunch with these people. I was feeling a little overwhelmed that morning because I'd seen in the newspaper just that morning that some workers in one of those pickup trucks had been hurt in a traffic accident. I'd never met any of them. Mostly I saw them from a distance. But I knew I was cared for by these people. How was I going to eat, I wondered. Even now I'm aware that the salads I love come to me from the hands of people who work in dangerous conditions. That lunch many years ago, after she finished her prayer, I found myself venting. I just don't feel like I deserve this food. People suffer so that I can eat. My friends, my interfaith companions, looked at me with kindness that day. We all looked at our food silently for a moment. And as we did, we heard the sound of the workers in the kitchen preparing food for others the way they'd just prepared it for us. And then another student looked at me kindly. He looked at me fiercely. And he said to me, looking me hard in the eye, fiercely but kindly, fiercely but gently. And he said, be grateful, Joel, be grateful. Be grateful for the life and energy of the people that is given to you in this food, that is given to all of us in this food. I don't remember his religious tradition, but I do remember how he looked as he spoke to me. It wasn't just the words, but even as his body asking me to be grateful, his body literally in a way passing on some energy of life to me in that moment, saying to me, yes, eat, be grateful. There's life and energy, and there's love in that food. I wonder, had he ever worked in those fields himself, harvesting food for people he would never meet? I don't know. When Elizabeth and I were talking about this service, and we were talking about the pride that her family has for their work, their service to others, the pride of work that will be found in the families that soon will come here in the Head Start School that will begin this May. I suddenly had a flash of a memory back to my own grandfather. My grandfather grew up on a farm. He was what they called in those days a tenant farmer. They didn't own the land they worked. They had to rent it from someone. And then of all the food that they raised, they had to give a proportion of it to the landowner. My grandfather worked hard. He didn't talk much about that time in his life, but I loved hearing his stories, and I would keep listening to them. And I found that if I listened long enough, he'd tell the stories he normally didn't tell, and he would talk about working in a field, driving a team of horses, plowing the land, harvesting the food. And I was thinking back on that, and as Elizabeth talked about the pride and the gift of the people who bring food to our tables, I got to thinking about my grandfather. And actually, my grandfather and my family of his generation. I remember as I was a kid, just perhaps the same age as some of the children here with us here in the service. We were at a family reunion one summer, and the older folks were in a group talking with one another about a family member who had come into some very great success. Now, my family, my dad's family was from Southern Ohio, and they're folks who were from Appalachia. Somewhat like the Midwest, but perhaps a little different. And I remember them talking, and this moment has always stuck with me. They were talking about this relative who was, well, he was kind of parading his newfound wealth a bit around. And in the culture, at least of my grandparents, that was not thought of very highly. In fact, they were realizing that, I realized as they talked, that they were wishing that he would be a little more humble about his success. They weren't saying that it was bad that he was successful, just that he was not at all humble about it. And then I remember my grandfather saying, there's honor in hard work, no matter what kind of work that is. My father used to say the same thing often. Hard work, good work, doesn't matter what work it is, as long as it's honest. There's dignity in it, there's value in it, and service to the community. I was glad to reconnect with those memories as Elizabeth and I talked. And it took me, and it reconnected me finally with that experience I had with that young boy who was looking at that carrot that came out of dirt 20 years ago. It wasn't long after that I had taken my son camping. I used to take my children camping every summer. We'd go to the wildest places we could think of. We were in Algonquin Park in Canada this particular time, and we were camped by a large lake here in northern Ontario, and it's a beautiful lake. The sun had risen, and I was sleeping in because I could. My 11-year-old son had woken up early. We'd gotten fishing gear, and we'd figured out how it all worked, so he'd gotten up early. He pulled out the fishing gear, took it out, put the bait on it, and dropped a hook in the water, because there it was. There, it was ready to go. He caught a fish pretty quickly. He woke me up. Dad, I caught a fish. I was, whoa, well, that's great. And he said, but Dad, what do I do with it? What do I do now? I said, let's eat it for breakfast. And he looked at me a little stunned for a moment. And I said, well, the first thing we need to do is not let the fish suffer anymore, because of course, the hook had gone through part of its head, which is what hooks do. So I took a log and I struck the head of the fish, and the fish died. My son watched as the life drained from the fish's eyes. My thoughtful child cried a little. And even so, we gutted, cooked, and ate with gratitude that fish that morning. Both my son and I having a new or renewed sense of what it means to be alive and to be nourished by other beings in this world. And that fish's body was truly delicious in a profound and immediate way. We were very aware of the gift of that life for ourselves. It was a total serendipity that we have a tenant here at the church that's a Head Start school, and that it happens to work with migrant workers. And yet, a wonderful spiritual opportunity. For me, part of the spiritual opportunity has been to remember, come back with some of these memories about what it means to live in the interconnected web of life, and to remember what the inherent worth and dignity of all people and all beings really means when we're all interconnected. It means many things, I know. But this morning, as I think about how much I appreciate the salads I eat once or twice, should I admit, sometimes 3 times a day, the inherent worth and dignity that I carry, that each of you has within you, it's not determined by our status. It's not determined by wealth or success. We are not worthy because we have things. We can be proud of who we are because perhaps of the way we live a covenant. We can know that our dignity is full and beautiful because of the way we treat others, the way we serve each other in the world. We can remember our own inherent worth and dignity by celebrating the inherent worth and dignity of others and being grateful for the life force they give to us, the life of their very living. It is good that we are joyful. It is good that we receive these gifts of others with joy and pleasure and enjoyment. And that we in turn use the energy of our own lives and of enjoyment to give the same opportunities and dignity to others. It is this gift and the fierce eyes of a man whose name or even religion I cannot remember that still looks into my soul and asks me to say yes, enjoy, be thankful, be grateful, live. Now, I grew up singing this hymn. It's number 21 in these gray hymn books. It is one of my favorites. Growing up in the Unitarian Universalist Church in Columbus, Ohio. And sometimes I got to tell you that my theology changes back and forth. Some of you may know I've mentioned that sometimes I feel I wake up in the morning and I'm a theist. And the humanist in me is like, are you still doing that? Oh, for goodness sakes, Joel, that's kind of woo-woo, don't you think? And the theist in me, sometimes I wake up and I'm a humanist, and the theist in me says, we are connected and there's more to life than we know. So I tell you that story because sometimes I sing what's in the book, Source of all to thee we raise, now our hymn of grateful praise. And sometimes I find myself singing the original word, Lord of all, to thee we raise. Doesn't matter, either way. Let's sing together for the beauty of the earth. I invite you to stand in spirit or in body as you wish, and to sing number 21. For the beauty of the earth, for the splendor of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Source of all, to thee we raise. For the joy of ear and eye, for the heart and mind's delight, making sense to sound and sight. Source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn. I offer you a prayer in closing, a prayer that I often say if I'm with others and wanting to remember the interconnections of the web of life around us and the gifts of the food that we're about to eat together. I wrote it actually for a Thanksgiving meal many years ago now. I'll put it in the Know, our electronic newsletter, if you'd like to see it. Spirit of life and joy, we give thanks for many hands today. Hands that held us when we were born. Hands that hold us when we first eat, first cry, first smile. Hands that hold ours when we are small, crossing streets and other dangers, big and small. Hands that build the rooms that shelter us as we grow. Hands that point our ways to learning and to love. Hands holding passion and holding others in desire. Hands that bind the vows of one another when we take hands and marry. Hands that steady us when we are old. And hands that will carry us one last time when we have died. All our lives are recalled in gratitude and memorial celebration in the hands that we hold and that hold us. And many hands bring to our tables the food we eat, hands of farmers steering plows, tractors, animals, hands of laborers in fields and barns, hands of workers building highways and rails that carry the food to packing houses in this neighborhood around us and to the stores and to our homes. Hands of beloved friends and families in our kitchens, cooking the meals that we eat. And our own hands in which we can hold our prayers and live our prayers, and with which we eat. And may we eat in gratitude. For all these hands and for the life and joy they bring us, we give thanks this day. Amen. Go in peace. Be in peace. We'll be together again.
Those of you who are tuning in online, please remember there is a Zoom coffee hour directly after the service. Ollie Howell will be hosting, and if you look in your emails, you should have the link there. Thanks so much.